Hey everybody, this is Tracy here with another edition of A View from Tracy's Point. And as promised, I am back with more of the transcripts from the United States versus Kelly, McDavid, and Brown. So we're going to pick up at the opening statements by Jennifer Bonjean. And so this is from Wednesday. Yep. August 17th, 2022, which was the day that the actual trial started, and they started with opening statements, and then I'll drop the link above for the opening statements by the government. So hold tight and I'll be right back. Okay, so Jennifer Bonjean started things off as far as the defense teams are concerned. And she says, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to take 1 minute to reintroduce myself and my team and my client. My name is Jennifer Bonjean. My law office is the Bonjean Law Group. It is based in New York City. We have a satellite office here in Chicago. My partner is Ashley Cohen. My associate, or our associate, is Diane O'Connell, and our client is Mr. Robert Kelly, who we proudly represent. Now, we want to thank you for your service. It is not lost on us the sacrifice that you are making, and it is a lengthy trial. The government, as you heard, has a long narrative story that they intend to try to prove. And there's going to be a lot of people that come forward to testify. So it's going to take us some time. So we appreciate your presence. And we also want to thank you because our system of justice depends on the bravery of people like you. And make no mistake about it, some measure of bravery will be required by you because this is a challenging case. It is a challenging case first of all because very few of you came in here as a blank slate. Most of you, perhaps all of you, came in here with some knowledge, some information about my client. And in most cases across the country and courtrooms in this building and courtrooms everywhere, that doesn't happen. You walk into a courtroom, you don't know what case it is, you don't know who the defendant is, you don't know what the charges are, you have no information about the person who is on trial, the accused, and you come in with a fresh set of eyes. Mr. Kelly doesn't get that. He has no choice because of information that's in the public domain to have a jury that comes in with information about him, about allegations against him. And some of you probably know, and the government mentioned it, you're familiar with him as this Grammy award-winning R&B singer, but many of you indicated that you were familiar with certain ugly allegations against him. And you also heard going through jury selection that not everybody was cut out for the job that you have. Lots of people, I can't do it. I cannot be fair and impartial. But not you all. You said you could. You promised you could. And we are going to hold you to it because the Constitution guarantees my client a fair and impartial jury and a fair and impartial process. The Constitution guarantees that for all of us, even your loved ones, there is no R. Kelly exception. He gets that guarantee too. And that doesn't mean that we simply fake it or we just give it the old college try. He is entitled to a non-biased jury, and that is a tall order. It's a tall order, but you all said you could do it. And we commend you for that. You were chosen because of that, and that is what the law requires. And make no mistake, Mr. Kelly is not looking for any special treatment, no special consideration. He only asks what the law requires, and that is that you consider the evidence in this courtroom that comes in through this courtroom. That's it. And that you judge each witness, each and every witness, through the same lens, a lens unclouded by what you think you may know about him, or what you've heard on the streets, or what you may have heard in a headline, or what you may have heard in a docuseries. And importantly, that you consider every single one of those counts, all 13 of them that the government put up. You consider them separately and determine whether the government has met its burden for each element of each offense for each 13 counts, period. And that's a big ask. But you said you could do it, and we are grateful to have you, and we believe you will, and we believe if you do your job, you will reach the just and righteous verdict, and it will be a verdict of not guilty. Now, you heard the government depict Mr. Kelly literally as a monster, essentially. That's really what you heard. And they believe that their evidence is going to show that he is a serial abuser. That's what they believe. And it is true that Mr. Kelly is imperfect. It is true that on his journey from poverty to stardom, that he stumbled along the way. We won't deny that. That is what humanity is about. Sometimes people do stumble along the way, and it's important. And as the government pointed out, literally overnight, Mr. Kelly went from being a high school dropout singing in the subways to a mega superstar who was marketed as a sex symbol. That was his story, and he was ill-equipped. We are not going to tell you that he was equipped to handle that. Many celebrities haven't been. And because he was a high school dropout, because he had literacy issues, because he couldn't read and write, he had to rely on people. He had to rely on a lot of people for support, for help, for guidance. And Mr. McDavid was one of his managers. That's true. Mr. McDavid was someone who worked with Mr. Kelly for a long time and who assisted him in understanding the world. And I bring this up not because anything about Mr. Kelly's life is some type of defense to the charges that the government is bringing. But it is important when the government wants to paint him as a monster that you remember that we are talking about a human being, and that we implore you to keep those emotions in check, because you promised you would. You would not let sympathies and bias and emotion, that you would be technicians. That's what you need to be in this case, because we're talking about some pretty heavy stuff. Now, as you have likely gathered from the government's opening, it has brought what I would call a hodgepodge of charges against him that largely date back a quarter century, 25 years ago, even charges for which he's already faced prosecution in 2008, charges for which he was acquitted of. And the government, who professes to care about justice for all of these alleged individuals that they have referenced, have waited over 2 decades to bring this case in a mob justice climate where hashtag movements tell us what we should and should not believe, and where prosecutions are built around docuseries and social media movements. But that's not what we're here to do. Again, you are technicians. You are here to listen to the evidence. And while the government may think this is a very simple and straightforward case, it is for them. Their goal is for you to just say, he is a really bad guy, so therefore guilty. But that's not what your oath requires. Your oath requires that you look at each and every single count and determine whether he committed each element of that count by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I do want to talk about the evidence a little bit. I am not going to overwhelm you with a narrative that you couldn't possibly begin to follow, because the evidence comes from the witness stand. It doesn't come from attorneys' mouths, and the government, what they presented to you is just what they believe the evidence is going to show. It's not evidence, and frankly, neither are my words. My words is not evidence. But what the evidence appears to be, the government told you that they suspect that they will show you video clips Now, it sounds as if there's going to be all these video clips. There is going to be 3 video clips. 3. They've charged him with 4, but the 4th one doesn't exist, and it never existed. They're going to present 3 video clips, and I'm going to take all the mystery out of this for you. They are sexually explicit. They are graphic. Okay, they are meant to shock and awe you. They are going to force you to watch way more than we all want to watch. I guarantee it. They will need all of 10 seconds to look at these videos. You will need all of 10 seconds to look at these videos to know exactly what. Mr. Julian, could we have a sidebar, Your Honor? Proceedings heard at sidebar on the record. And that information is redacted. So it's the end of the sidebar. Ms. Bongine is back. So as I was saying, you are going to see video. It will take you all of 10 or 15 seconds to recognize it's sexually explicit. We're not distributing that. We're not disputing that. It is sexually explicit. However, the tapes really have no evidentiary value unless someone can come in and authenticate them. Unless someone is going to come in and tell you what it means and what it is. Now, the government says that Rishona, who is now nearly 40 years old, is going to come in and identify herself and Mr. Kelly in these video clips. She's going to take the oath according to the government and say that she was, I think, 14 years old or 15. I think 14. And that she and Robert engaged in this behavior and it was video recorded. We'll have to see if that bears out, because for the last 22 years, she has adamantly denied that it was her in that video. Before there was any criminal investigation, she denied it. She denied it repeatedly to prosecutors, to social workers, to police officers. She denied it under oath to a grand jury. And you know who else denied it? Her parents. We're calling them Brandon and Susan, but their names is really Greg and Valerie Landfair. Rest in peace, Mr. Greg. I'm not sure. That's just the pseudonyms they're going by. It's not their real names, but that's what we're calling them. And they too denied it to police officers, to law enforcement, to prosecutors, to a grand jury. They took an oath. They promised to tell the truth, and they denied it. Now, you heard the government's explanation for these denials is that Mr. Kelly had this Svengali grip on this family for what, 20 years. That's what their theory is, that he used some type of influence and I guess employed the father. That's their theory, that for 2 decades that's what they did. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have to decide whether that makes much sense at all. It's not. It's not a secret that Mr. Kelly had a relationship with Rishona's family. This is not a very long-standing relationship. In fact, I'm pretty sure that 4 of Mr. Kelly's albums or songs for which he was either nominated or received Grammys, Rishona's father was on those as a guitarist. In fact, Mr. Kelly maintained a relationship with these people up until, his arrest in 2019. They came to his birthday parties. They corresponded. They were friends. This is a legitimate relationship that lasted for decades, long after Mr. Kelly was acquitted in 2008, long after Mr. Kelly feared that there would be some prosecution. This was a long-standing, legitimate relationship that went on for years. The government has suggested in their opening, and presumably there will be testimony, that this was just a 2-decade-long obstruction conspiracy. No, the evidence would not bear that out. You'll see pictures of Mr. Kelly and Rishona's brother, who is a drummer. I mean, this was a relationship with an entire family that lasted for a long time. And true, it is true that sometimes Mr. Kelly would assist this family with some money here and there over the course of 20 years. but long, long after there was any fear of a prosecution. Let's not forget, Mr. Kelly was acquitted. He didn't fear prosecution. Now, the question is, why is Rishona coming forward now, all these years later? Well, only Rishona can answer that. But we do know one thing. She too, the government, didn't mention that, but she too is testifying under a grant of immunity. What does that mean? Well, a grant of immunity is a deal with the government. Why does Rishona need a deal with the government? Well, according to Rishona's counsel, her attorneys, she believes her statements and whatever statements she made to the government are self-incriminating, would incriminate her in crimes. What those crimes are, well, again, we'll have to wait to hear from Rishona herself. We do know one potential crime is that she testified under oath falsely, but that's perjury. But there might be other crimes. But we do know that the government has promised her that so long as she comes in here and testifies, well, they say truthfully, but they get to decide what the truth is, that she would never be prosecuted for those offenses. And guess what? Rishona's mother, who you're going to hear from, she's got a deal too. Or at least she agreed in what is known as a proffer agreement, that she could make statements without fear of those statements being used against her. Why do these people need immunity deals? Well, that's the type of information that we'll have to hear from the witness stand. And that type of information will be important for you assessing the credibility of all of the charges. You're going to have to decide whether these video clips are authentic. As I mentioned, we're talking about two VCR tapes here. There's the one that was the subject of the 2008 prosecution that has one clip on it. And then there's another videotape that the government mentioned, and it has two other clips on it. And this is the one that came through, goodness gracious, Chuck, Charles Freeman, Keith Murrell, Lisa. These are the individuals that had this tape squirreled away apparently for 20 years, and only in 2019 does this tape reemerge. And Charles Freeman, who is a criminal, Charles Freeman, who is an extortionist, Charles Freeman, who spent a significant amount of time trying to enrich himself off Mr. Kelly by extorting him and blackmailing him. That is the story. And he brings forward this tape after 2019, represented by an attorney who is also a criminal. You will learn that Michael Avenatti represented Mr. Freeman. Michael Avenatti is in prison right now for fraud. Freeman is testifying under a grant of immunity too. Come in here and say all those bad things about Mr. Kelly, and you get no trouble from your extorting, for your blackmailing, for all those things you did to enrich yourself. Who else? Lisa. Lisa, who the government says stole a videotape, took a videotape because she was on it. This is the videotape you're never going to see, by the way, because, well, it doesn't exist, and it never existed. But Lisa did take some videotapes from Mr. Kelly, and Mr. Kelly will not deny that he did sometimes record his sexual activities. You know, I should point out that Mr. Kelly, I'm not here to defend his moral character or defend his sexual proclivities when it comes to the amount of partners he has or anything of that nature, okay? And when you go back to the jury room eventually, you're not going to be asked to decide whether he is a good or bad person, okay? That's for social media. You can hold those thoughts, and that's something that you can maybe communicate there. But in here, the only question is whether he committed the charged offenses. But you're going to hear. You already heard it. The government told you about this wild chase, this mission that, frankly, I couldn't follow it. But you have Lisa Van Allen, Keith Murrell, her boyfriend, and Charles Freeman. And what you need to know is that they're criminals. They extorted Mr. Kelly. And they Objection, argumentative. That's Mr. Julian. Oh, Bonjean, the evidence is going to show that all three of them have immunity deals. And then Julian mumbles something, and then the court reporter, microphone please. And then the judge, the objection that is argumentative, well, is possibly a statement of fact. So I don't know. Overruled. Bonjean, thank you, Your Honor. So Lisa, Keith, and Chuck. Yeah, Lisa did take tapes. She didn't take it because, and the evidence will show that she did not take any tape because she was worried about her sexual activities with Mr. Kelly getting into the public domain. No, 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 no. She took those tapes. And again, they acknowledged that she was an adult. She took those tapes to shake him down. That's what she did. Because why? If she took it, where is it? If you're so worried about it getting out there, if you took it, where is it? Why did you send it off to some guy? And what you're going to find out is after these people took these tapes, they reproduced them and they put it into the public domain. They are CPers. That's what they are. They are the ones that made copies and enriched themselves off tapes, off sexually explicit tapes. That's what they did. And I should say, we don't even know what all the tapes that Lisa took from Mr. Kelly. Now, you are also going to hear evidence. Well, let me just go back to one thing. You'll have to decide whether you believe these people. You'll have to decide, okay, whether any of these people are worth a shred of believability, okay? Whether they deserve any ounce of credibility. Because in order to find my client guilty of some type of obstruction, and frankly to find any other defendants guilty of some type of obstruction, you are going to have to credit three individuals with immunity, Lord, I'm sleepy, immunity deals where they get to come up here, and as long as they say what the government believes to be the truth, they are clear and free of all criminal charges for their criminal conduct. Now I want to talk about the government's charges that they added to this indictment. These enrichment charges of these other women, they too are all going by pseudonyms, and I don't want to get it wrong. These are not their real names, but these are individuals named Nia, Tracy, Pinky, and Brittany. You heard about these four now women. You don't see any videotapes involving these women, and you will have to decide from their testimony whether you believe them when they say that they had relationships with Mr. Kelly when they were underage. But I want to get into a little bit of what we know their testimony will show. One of them, Tracy, the evidence will show is that she now claims that she was underage. She is going to testify that she was 16 when she had some type of relationship with Mr. Kelly. That's what the government told you. It's going to be contradicted by the fact that she sued Kelly years ago and said she was 17 and did not claim she was underage. And in Illinois, the age of consent is 17 for activity. 17 is the age of consent. So let's get this straight. You will have to decide whether you believe that when she goes to sue Mr. Kelly for money, she would say she's older than she actually was. No, she's moved back her age. That's what the evidence is going to show. You're also going to see that she told investigators that she was a woman in a still photo from a video that came into the possession of law enforcement. There's a number of videos, and this is a video of a grown woman, a consenting woman, not a woman who has made any allegation against Mr. Kelly. I'm not going to say what her name is because it's irrelevant, and frankly, she doesn't deserve that. But this Tracy tried to tell the government that was her. Oh, that's me. I believe that's me. Well, she had to eventually admit, no, that wasn't me actually. That's the type of testimony you're dealing with. Pinky and Brittany, they too tried to extort Mr. Kelly. They tried to extort him for $35,000 and say essentially, we know you've had those legal problems, and we're going to go out there and say that you did that to us if you don't give us $35,000. That's what the evidence is going to show. It's called extortion. And I'm not saying that Mr. Kelly didn't have sex with Pinky or Brittany, but they weren't minors. Now, as I said earlier, the government has laid out what they believe their case will be, and they have depicted a very ugly picture of Mr. Kelly. Really, a picture of someone with bad character. That's what they've laid out for you. And they are hoping that you will not be technicians that you need to be, but that you will assume that because maybe that's not fair. They're hoping, but here is the risk. You cannot, the law does not allow you to assume that because if you conclude that he's a bad guy, that he has done some bad things, that he must have done these other bad things. The law does not allow that. We try counts, offenses, not people's character. And it can get very muddy and it can get very difficult to keep those things straight. But I am going to implore you, because you promise that you will do your very best to keep those things straight. It's entirely improper, and you will get the law from the judge. So I'm not going to belabor that, but you cannot just say, well, I think the government met its burden on this count. Therefore, everything else they say, they met their burden on. So you have to look at each one separately and decide whether, in fact, the government has met its burden as to each count. Because it is entirely possible that in the climate that Mr. Kelly could also be a victim. He can of exploitation, financial exploitation, extortion, those things as well, because there are strong motivators there. So it is important that you do your job because, ladies and gentlemen, the government's case really does hinge on the testimony of liars, extortionists, people who engaged in the business of trafficking porn, and frankly, if you believe the government's story, parents themselves who engaged in sex trafficking. Those are their witnesses. That's their case. So I would ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to remember that sometimes people may do a bad thing. It doesn't mean they're all bad, and it doesn't mean that everything they do is bad. And on the flip side, there are a lot of good people that do good things, and it doesn't mean that everything they do is good. Mr. Kelly welcomes this case and implores you to look at the evidence and to make a decision on each count separately, and not to just throw your hands up in the air and say, he seems like a pretty bad guy. Because if you do that, you will not be holding up your end of the bargain. But we believe you will, and we believe that you will reach the right verdict at the end of this case. And I thank you for your time. And then the judge. We will now take a 15-minute recess, and then we'll hear from Mr. McDavid's attorney. The court security officer. All rise. The jury leaves, and then they have the recess. So the judge. The jurors are on their way up, so please gather. Mr. Julian. Judge, there are a few things I'd like to address with you before the jury comes back in. Okay, go ahead. Okay, one thing. I'd ask that you re-admonish the gallery. There was some noise in certain corners of the courtroom during discussion on objections and about when me and Ms. Bongine were previewing the evidence. I just ask that you remind everyone to be quiet or step out if you know there's something that's being said or whatever that's going to draw a reaction. That would be one thing. Thing two, and I don't have the exact quote, but at some point during Ms. Bongine's opening, she said words to the effect of that the jury could go on social media, share their thoughts about certain things. I just ask that you admonish the jury again that they don't. You did not say when. I don't think she suggested they could do that today, but just remind the jury they're not to go on social media. They're not to do any sort of investigating or anything like that. Bongine, then the judge, I don't recall that. I don't recall that latter comment. However, if again, it's difficult for me to hear what's going on over in the corner because this is a pretty big courtroom. But if there are comments, please do refrain from it, particularly any kind of emotional comments or laughing or anything like that. Just if you're here as an observer, so please act that way. Otherwise, we may have to remove people who disobey that. Are they ready? The law clerk, they're not here yet. The judge, okay, they come from the 10th floor, so there's a brief pause, then the jury comes in, the court security officer, all rise. The judge, please be seated. Now for Mr. McDavid, Mr. Glassman, you may address the jury. And so now we have the opening statements for Daryl McDavid's team. And it is Mr. Glassman, and he says, between 1997 and 2008, Gerald Margolis was one of the most accomplished and celebrated entertainment law attorneys in the entire country. He represented everyone from Robin Williams to Neil Diamond to the Rolling Stones. Jerry Margolis was the best at what he did. Between 2002 and 2008, Edward Jensen was the most celebrated criminal defense attorney in the whole city of Chicago. Over the years, he represented politicians, judges, lawyers, business leaders, organized crime figures whose prominence and fame was known all across the country. Edward Jensen was the best at what he did. Between 1997 and 2008, John Toohey was a partner at Mayer Brown, one of the largest and most prestigious law firms throughout the country. He was uniformly respected by judges and lawyers alike across the city of Chicago as an outstanding civil litigator with the highest integrity. John Toohey was excellent at what he did. Between 1997 and 2008, Jack Palladino worked as a private investigator for the famous and highly respected throughout this country. It was his investigation that brought down the tobacco industry and ended with one of the largest settlements in this country's history. He worked for Hollywood superstars and presidents of the United States. Jack Palladino was the best at what he did. So I'm sure you're all wondering, why do we begin this case against Daryl McDavid by listening to accolades of some of the finest legal professionals in this country? It is because the evidence will show that these are the people that Daryl McDavid hired to defend Robert Kelly. You have heard that Daryl McDavid is charged with conspiracy, with entering into agreements to obtain videos to obstruct justice. But when it comes to the 2002 criminal allegations against Mr. Kelly, the evidence will prove that these renowned professionals that I just told you about were the only people that Daryl McDavid entered into any agreements with. It was these men that decided what settlements would be paid to certain women who made allegations. It was these men who arranged the collection of videotapes that needed to be analyzed to figure out what was on them. It was these men who decided what people needed to be paid in order to obtain evidence and information critical to defending Robert Kelly. And Daryl McDavid entered into a formal agreement with these lawyers to work as their agent. He did what they directed. He followed their instructions, and he did it because, as Robert Kelly's business manager, that was his job. When it comes to the 2008 defense of Robert Kelly, you are going to learn that the lawyers, they did their job with excellence. You will learn that the investigators, they did their job with excellence. And working alongside with them, Daryl McDavid did his job with excellence. Ladies and gentlemen, as you listen to the evidence in this case, you will learn that doing their job as a lawyer and doing their job as a business manager to a superstar is not a crime. Being successful in your efforts is not a crime. Yet, it is that success by Daryl McDavid and these extraordinary lawyers that he hired is what brings him here today in front of all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to the agreements made by Daryl McDavid, you will learn that they were indeed agreements with these professionals to provide the best possible defense to Robert Kelly. They were agreements with these professionals to defend and safeguard Robert Kelly's image and career. They were agreements made by men who were committed to doing their jobs at the highest level. The evidence would show that is all they did. They worked with Daryl McDavid to do their job, and neither he nor they should be criticized for that. Neither he nor they should be held criminally responsible for the things that which their client never told them the truth. You will learn that when it came to the defense of Robert Kelly, each of the acts Daryl McDavid took were at the express direction of the esteemed professionals that agreed that these were the right and legal things to do to best defend their client. And Daryl McDavid, he had no reason to doubt them. They were at all times just like him, just doing their job. And so, as this case unfolds, the question for you will become whether or not you really think that a group of the most excellent and respected attorneys and investigators in this country decided they would agree with Daryl McDavid to obstruct justice and obtain some videos, to risk their entire lives, to risk their careers, their reputations for an R&B singer who was insignificant compared to their other clients and entire body of work. Oh, child, the shade of it all. So for this moment on behalf of Daryl McDavid, we ask you one important question. Why would they ever do that? And the evidence in this case will answer that question. The answer will be they wouldn't. The question will be they didn't. And because, as you will learn, that these are the only people with whom Daryl McDavid agreed to do anything with, he can't be guilty unless they are too. And in this case, that's going to create a problem for the government. You see, when they brought these charges against Daryl McDavid, what the government did was they made a sort of promise. They made a promise to Daryl McDavid. They made a promise to this client, to this court, and they made a promise to all of you that they would prove each and every element of their case beyond a reasonable doubt. It's called the burden of proof. And when it comes to the elements of knowledge and intent, they will fail to keep that promise. They will fail to meet their burden, and they will fail because Daryl McDavid is not guilty. Now, there is a fundamental fact that is critical to all considerations about the defense of Robert Kelly between 2002 and 2008. Lawyers and managers have to rely on their clients. In fact, they have a duty to rely on their clients and listen to what their clients tell them. What they tell them shapes their beliefs. It shapes their opinions. It shapes what they think the strategy is that they need to follow. So the central issue to all of the considerations here about Daryl McDavid, about what he knew and what he intended is, what did Robert Kelly say to Daryl McDavid back in 2002 and 2008? What did he tell the lawyers? From the first of these allegations about a tape of a minor, you will learn that Robert Kelly denied it. The woman on the tape denied it. Her mother denied it. Her father denied it. They denied it to law enforcement officers. They denied it to Robert's own private investigators. They denied it to his lawyers. There are documented reports that you will see showing that time and time again, the people working for Robert were told that these allegations were false. and not just by him, but by the woman who was in that video with him. And ladies and gentlemen, as his business manager working with lawyers to defend him, Daryl McDavid shouldn't be criticized for believing what they said, especially when you will see back then there was a lot of evidence supporting to Daryl McDavid and the lawyers that the allegations about this tape were simply untrue. They were not legitimate. And we will present that evidence to you throughout the course of this trial. Document by document, you will see it, and you will get a clear picture of what someone in Daryl's position would have believed back between 2002 and 2008. And you won't just have to take my word for it. Daryl McDavid has absolutely nothing to hide. He will take the stand and he will tell you in his own words that he did what he did and what he did not do. And as you listen to the evidence in this case, it will be important to remember that what matters for these criminal charges is not what we know today, with different witnesses saying different things from what they denied back in 2002 and 2008. What matters here is Daryl McDavid's intent and Daryl McDavid's knowledge back then. What we have to focus on is what we saw back then, what he was told back then, and what he believed back then in 2002 and 2008, not as you sit here today. And you will see that based on what he saw back then, anyone in Daryl's position would have believed that that tape was illegitimate. Anyone in his position who saw what he saw and was told what he was told would have believed that the girl on the tape is not the person that's going to sit here in this courtroom and tell you a different story, different than what she told all of those people back then. We will show you that everything he saw and everything he was told led him to believe that the tape was not legitimate, that Robert should be exonerated at trial. And because he believed that, there was never any intention to obstruct justice or break the law. The only intention was to present the best defense possible and see him exonerated for a crime that Daryl McDavid and Robert Kelly's lawyers believed he did not commit. In this case, there are basically two types of crimes that Daryl is accused of. First, he is accused of entering into an agreement to obstruct justice. To prove that, you will learn that the government must show that it was his intent to get people to make false statements, that it was his intent to illegally manipulate evidence. However, if it's based on what he saw back then and believed back then, that the defense of Robert Kelly was a good one and that his client was wrongly accused, it's not possible for him to be guilty of this. And the second type of crime he's charged with is possessing and agreeing to possess these videos. To prove that, the government must prove that Daryl McDavid knew and intended to get rid of the videos and that he actually got it. But if Daryl McDavid never saw the tapes or knew what was on the tapes that are at issue at this trial, he can't be guilty of those charges either. And with that in mind, let us consider that some of the evidence was showed that led to the 2008 acquittal of Robert Kelly. In December of 2000, you will learn for the first time that Daryl McDavid was told that there was some allegations of an inappropriate relationship between Robert Kelly and this woman we're calling Rashona. Some anonymous person called the Department of Children and Family Services, and you will learn that Robert Kelly told Daryl about this incident. You will learn that Robert Kelly strongly denied that there was any truth to it. He told Daryl that the source of these rumors was a disgruntled individual. She went by the name of Sparkle, and Daryl knew that person. He knew that Sparkle hated Robert because they had a falling out over a record deal. You will find out when confronted with these allegations, Daryl did what anyone in this position would do. He contacted Robert's lawyer, Jerry McGallis. Jerry listened to these allegations and determined that they wouldn't simply take Robert's word for it. Instead, Jerry hired the renowned investigator that I talked about, Jack Palladino, and he hired him to go interview Rishona and her family to try to get down to the truth of the situation. And you will find out that when Jack Palladino interviewed Rishona, she told him that none of it was true. When he interviewed Rishona's mother and Rishona's father, they told him none of it was true. And so Jack prepared a report detailing all of this, that the fact that all of these individuals were denying the truth of any of these allegations. And on top of that, Rishona and her parents told Jack that it was Sparkle who was starting these rumors about her and Robert. Jerry McGillis showed that report to Daryl McDavid, and from that moment, that report shaped Daryl's views on the claims about Robert and Rishona. These people had been interviewed by police. They had been interviewed by Robert's own investigators, and they said, Mom and Dad included, that it was all a lie. And Daryl McDavid had no reason to believe otherwise. And as time went on, from December of 2000 through 2001, there continued to be rumors about sex tapes involving R. Kelly being sold on the streets. Now, there was a whole variety of these sex tapes that were allegedly out there. There were tapes about Robert having sex with an adult dancer that worked for him. There were tapes of Robert having sex with multiple partners, one of them being his wife. There was tapes about Robert having sex with a wife of a professional athlete, and there was a fake internet video going around at that time too. And faced with these rumors of sex tapes, Daryl McDavid did the same thing he did before. He called Jerry Margolis, and Jerry told him that these kinds of sex tapes could ruin someone's career. The key was to get them. The key was to find out what was on them, to be ahead of whatever might get into the media, and an effort to do that was undertaken. In the summer of 2001, you will learn that a man named Chuck Freeman contacted Robert Kelly and told him he could get one or more of these tapes in exchange for money. And Robert told Daryl about this. He was his business manager. And as was his usual practice, Daryl McDavid called Jerry Margolis to figure out what he should do. And Jerry Margolis was adamant. If there are tapes that they can get their hands on, they should so they could see what was on them. And at that time, there was no way to know what was on the tape Chuck said he had. Certainly, Jerry and Daryl had no idea what was on it. And what did they do? They hired Jack Palladino to investigate Chuck. They hired Jack Palladino to get the tape, to see if Chuck actually had the tape. And as Ms. Bongine told you before me, you're going to learn that Chuck Freeman is a criminal. He is a con man. He has committed crime after crime, showing his dishonesty and his willingness to lie and cheat just to get money. That's what he does. That's all he is. And Jack Palladino learned that from his investigation. So Jerry Margolis and Jack Palladino knew that Chuck could not be trusted. And the plan was for Jack to meet Chuck in Kansas City and get whatever tape Chuck said he had. This happened in August of 2001. And you will be able to see that this plan was made by Jerry Margolis and Jack Palladino, because Jack Palladino's records and Jack Palladino's bills regarding this trip, they're all addressed to Jerry's law firm. They're certainly not agreeing to get any kind of video. They were agreeing to get whatever tape he had and to see what was on it. You heard the government say that, Daryl went to Kansas City and he met with Chuck. He saw what was on the tape and he took the tape in his possession. But the source of these claims is the only one person, Chuck Freeman. And you will learn that as Chuck Freeman was telling his story to the government, he told a lot of different stories. His claims were both incoherent and inconsistent. He told lie after lie and had been caught doing so. And he is telling these stories to get immunity for his admitted crimes of blackmailing other people. And he is the only person that is going to say that Daryl McDavid went down to Kansas City to get some sort of tape. Unfortunately for Chuck, the evidence in this case is going to tell a far different story. The evidence in this case will show what really happened. Bills and reports from Jack Palladino will show him listing all of the people that he interacted with in Kansas City. Daryl McDavid is not on that list. Jack Palladino's bills will list the people he had phone calls with, and one of those people was Daryl McDavid, showing that Daryl wasn't standing next to him in Kansas City. Jack had to call him to talk to him. But there will be far more powerful evidence than that, which exposes the lie that is being perpetrated by Chuck Freeman. You will learn that because Chuck is a criminal, an off-duty law enforcement officer was hired to be present in Kansas City to keep Jack safe when he met with Chuck. He was there when the meetings happened. He saw who was in the room, and he will tell you himself from that witness stand that Daryl McDavid was not in Kansas City. Daryl McDavid did not receive any videotape from Chuck Freeman. Jack Palladino got the tape. The tape was sent to Jerry Margolis. Daryl McDavid never saw it, and Jerry Margolis, after he watched this tape, called Daryl to tell him that it was such poor quality you couldn't identify anything about the person on that video. There was no CP involved. Whatever story Chuck might try to tell you now is going to be disproved by reliable and undeniable evidence. You will also learn that Daryl McDavid's beliefs about the truth and legitimacy of the claims about Robert Kelly having sex with Rishona was further impacted by additional investigations done by Jack Palladino. You will learn that Palladino interviewed a woman who was being approached by one of Robert's fired employees, Demetrius Smith, and he was offering her money to lie about having underage sex with Robert Kelly. And you will learn that the money to pay her to lie was coming from Robert's fired ex-manager, Barry Hankerson. Ooh, child. And I want you all to remember that name. Now listen, Barry Hankerson out there trying to pay people to lie on Kelly. And the same thing just came out in the news about Trey Songz, where this lady said that the attorney for one of Trey Songz's accusers offered her $200,000 to lie and say that Trey Songz had did something to her also. Whew, child. So I want you all to remember that name. Not only did Jack interview this young woman, she wore a wire and was recorded telling these people that she never had underage sex with Robert Kelly. And in response, they told her it was fine. They told her she would be paid by Barry as long as she made up that lie. That report was received by Jerry Margolis. It was shown to Daryl McDavid. And at that moment, they knew that people were being solicited to make false claims about Robert Kelly. And as women were coming forward, they weren't going to the police. They weren't going to investigators. They were going to lawyers who were demanding money to keep their false claims out of the media. And at that time, Daryl already knew that people were being paid to make up false claims like this, paid by people trying to destroy Robert's career. Anyone in his position would have doubted anyone simply because they came with their hands out asking for money, and that was happening all the time. On February 4th, 2002, that same Barry Hankerson made a call to Robert's assistant. She then contacted Jerry Margolis, who called Daryl. Barry Hankerson called to make a threat. He threatened that a tape was coming out, that it was Robert and his goddaughter. What? That the tape was going to ruin him, that it was going to put a stop to a scheduled performance at the Salt Lake City Olympics on February 8th of 2002, 4 days later, and this call was nothing but threatening and vindictive in nature. And when Daryl heard it, he knew two things. He knew that Barry was already out there paying people to make false claims about having sex with Robert Kelly, and he knew that Rishona, her mother, and her father had repeatedly denied having any kind of an inappropriate relationship with R. Kelly. So when this call came from Barry Hankerson, Daryl was obviously suspicious. Then on the same day, Jerry Margolis and John Toohey, one of Robert's civil lawyers, got a call from the Chicago Sun-Times. They said they had a tape of Robert with an individual the same day that Barry Hankerson called with his threatening call. Child, they was just doing way too much. Let me take a break because I lost my page. Where was I at? How did we get to Lisa Van Allen? Okay, did this thing skip down? No. Oh, God. Okay, wait a second. I must be was hitting the page down instead of the arrow down. Okay. Let's see here. So the Olympics, Daryl, the timing seemed a little bit. 2002 prosecution, when Daryl found out about the video. Is that where I'm at? He hired Edward Jensen, the best criminal defense attorney in Chicago. After he was hired, Ed Jensen personally met with Rishona privately in his office. And after the meeting, he came up to Daryl, looked him in the eye and said, "It's not her. The tape is fake, and I'm going to prove it." And they set out to do just that. You will learn that Daryl McDavid was shown interview reports from a witness who was aware of plans to generate fake tapes. You will learn that he was shown the presentation of a defense expert witness that did a frame-by-frame analysis of Robert Kelly's bike in the video. There is a mole on his bike, and in these frames, you saw the mole disappearing, then reappearing, then moving place to place to place. And on top of all that, he was shown Rishona's grand jury statement where she said under oath that it was not her on the tape. And faced with all of that, at that time, ladies and gentlemen, Daryl McDavid believed that the tape was a fraud, and he had no reason to believe anything else. So everything he did was to work with the lawyers and to exonerate his client, Robert Kelly. You will learn that during the pendency of the criminal charges, another person came out saying they had a sex tape. Her name is Lisa Van Allen. You will learn that she is associated with Chuck Freeman. And like Chuck, she claimed to have a threesome video of Robert Kelly and Rishona and her. And then she brought that to Daryl, that she watched it with Daryl and that she turned it over to Daryl. Just like Chuck Freeman, this woman has lied about this situation again and again and again. Her associate Keith Merle was discussing with Chuck Freeman about this supposed tape at that time, and he has lied over and over again. Lisa Van Allen, too, had to get immunity due to the acts of blackmail that she was engaged. She, too, changed her story again and again. She, too, will be caught in lie after lie, and she, too, will have her lies exposed by the evidence in this case, because the evidence would show that it was the law office of Edward Jensen that was in charge of the efforts to obtain whatever tape she said she had to determine what was on it. And this will be shown to you on polygraph results relating to the copy of that tape. These polygraphs were ordered by Edward Jensen. The results were provided to Edward Jensen. This was Edward Jensen's. The results were provided to Edward Jensen. This was Edward Jensen's investigation. Darryl McDavid never made anyone do anything. And you will learn that when Lisa Van Allen turned over the tape, there were people present, not liars and blackmail artists, but professional people that saw how that tape was delivered. Darryl McDavid never got the tape. The tape was reviewed by Edward Jensen and his experts. And what you will learn is the tape that Lisa Van Allen gave them was a threesome. She was in it, but the third party in it was not a minor victim. The third party was Robert Kelly's wife, Andrea. And while he desperately did not want that video to be in the media, it had nothing to do with any crime. You will learn that Chuck and Lisa were paid for turning over the sex tapes. You will learn that the payments were authorized by the lawyers Robert Kelly was working with and Darryl was working with. These payments were recorded in his bookkeeping, and these payments were included in expense reports submitted to the IRS. This was a legitimate investigation done by lawyers to protect Robert Kelly from media exposure. Darryl McDavid was authorized by the lawyers to provide the money, and no one ever, a single time, told him that any of this was illegal. This trial will take you back in time, ladies and gentlemen, back to dates ranging from 1997 to 2008. And you will see that at that time, Darryl McDavid had absolutely every reason to believe that Robert Kelly was telling him and his lawyers. And Darryl listened to the lawyers. He trusted the lawyers. He followed their directions. And in doing so, they did a great job for Robert. Robert was found not guilty because based on what was known to everyone back then, that was the right answer. And no one who knew had the information that Darryl did back then at that time thought anything differently. Eventually, there was a falling out between Darryl McDavid and Robert Kelly. You will see Darryl sued Robert for money that he believed he was owed. He identified the specific basis for the money he was owed. It was money he was owed for doing his job. It was money that he was owed for doing the best job he can to the best of his ability. And everything you need to know about that lawsuit is spelled out right on the document on its face. And we will go over it with you paragraph by paragraph to prove it. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout the course of this trial, you will see some awful things that will make you want to look away. Oh, Lord, let's see. Look away, but as the evidence comes in, ask yourself, what part of this did Darryl see before the 2008 trial? And the answer would be none of it. And you will also hear some terrible things that you were not going to want to listen to. But once again, the question for you will be, which of those things were told to Darryl before the 2008 trial? Again, the answer will be the same, none of it. You will learn that while the 2002 charges were pending, the entire music industry supported R. Kelly. They did not believe the allegations, and his record sales soared during the time of this case. The public supported R. Kelly. The people did not believe the allegations. And you will find out that prior to the 2008 trial, the things that Darryl McDavid saw, the things that Darryl McDavid was told, and the discussions Darryl McDavid had with the lawyers who indicated that the charges against Robert Kelly simply weren't true. And so, faced with what he saw, faced with what he was told, Daryl McDavid did his job. The lawyers for R. Kelly did their job. The jury in the 2008 case did its job. The fact that Robert and the girl in the video decided to lie to everyone about it back then makes it impossible to prove that his manager or the lawyers ever did anything but what they thought they were supposed to do. Because doing your job is not a crime, and so we expect this trial to end just as it began, as a case about agreements that Daryl McDavid made with Robert Kelly's lawyers to do the best that they can to defend him. This case will end with the fundamental question that brings us to the stand up here before you today on behalf of Daryl McDavid. If these lawyers, if these investigators who are known all around the country really knew the things that you will see and the things that you will hear in this group back then, do you really believe this esteemed group of professionals would risk their careers, would risk their lives, would risk their reputations and their legacy to defend someone who believed to be a pedophile? The evidence will give you the answer clearly. The answer will be the same then as it is now. The answer is they wouldn't. The answer is they didn't. The answer is, based on what they were told and what they were shown, this group of professionals simply did their jobs. Daryl McDavid did his job. That's what the experience is going to show. And that's why Daryl McDavid must be found not guilty on all counts. And then the judge, thank you. We'll recess for lunch now until 2 o'clock. All rise. And then the lunch recess takes at 1:07 p.m. Certificate, I certified that the foregoing is a correct transcript from the recording of proceedings in the above entitled matter. Okay, so Amy Spee was the court reporter, and that is what it had to say in opening arguments. And so this is the conclusion of the first day, and then the actual other what's his name, the Milton Brown guy, they will do their opening statements on the next video. So guys, that's it for me. Leave your comments below, rate the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And until the next time, I shall talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.